Hi guys, it's Debbie, and as every year, along with my best films of the year video, here comes my list of worst films of the year. This is actually the first year in which I've kind of struggled to come up with a final list. Or to better say, I gave films a little more grace. I felt a little more mature. Does this mean I'm getting old and wise? I used to be way more evil. I nearly feel like some films on today's list, a big emphasis on the word some, were just very disappointing rather than being just total trash. I also didn't totally commit like I did the other years, scouring other people's lists of worst films of the year. Also, I decided not to even try watching any of the new Pooniverse/Disney horror remakes because year after year they're just awful. I definitely don't expect that Piglet or Popeye's Revenge were going to suddenly surprise me this year. Another disclaimer, I watched Bride Hard and I know it is terribly reviewed, but it was so bad, so boring, and so stupid that I completely zoned out while watching it. So even though it would probably rank quite high on this list, I genuinely can't form a sentence that makes sense about the plot. I can't even remember half of the stuff that happens in that movie. Anyway, let's kick off this year's dumpster fire, starting with The Woman in Cabin 10, a film that tries to sell itself as this high-stakes crime thriller set at sea, clearly targeted at Netflix's crime-loving audience, the hype while waiting for the new Knives Out film. But it was so boring, so predictable, so simple that basically the villain is clear within the first minutes. And also, not only is it boring and predictable, but then basically everything that happens to the protagonist is borderline impossible. She's an investigative journalist invited to a party on a luxury yacht where she witnesses someone going overboard, but everyone says it's not true. A lot of the film is people gaslighting her while she's trying to figure out this mystery. The cast is stellar, and throughout the first half, I was actually trying to give this film a chance, but the second half is an absolute avalanche of over-the-top, impossible situations and plot holes. Also, why do they talk like that? This film is the peak of this new style of dialogue that a lot of films use nowadays, where everyone is super witty, constantly replying with a ridiculous amount of exposition for no reason. And to be fair, this is actually what Netflix and other streaming platforms actually want, because so many people watch content while scrolling on their phones, or they put films in the background while they're doing something completely different. So writers now are basically required to explain everything characters are doing for people who put films in the background while cooking. Now, I might be going a bit too hard on this specific film, but this is an overall problem of Netflix films and streaming platform films in general. If you're churning out new movies almost every day, I think Netflix's announcement was to commit to one new movie a week, plus endless new seasons of shows. For people who are paying for the subscription, whether they actually watch the screen for more than 30 seconds or not, why bother? You can just slap together the most generic ChatGPT dialogue, some basic animated opening credits, the flattest cinematography imaginable, and we're going to keep on being part of the problem because we just keep on watching these films. But moving up, we have Flight Risk, a film about a government witness being transported by plane across Alaska along with his police escort, but the pilot turns out not to be who they thought he was, and a fight for survival begins. Now, first and foremost, this film markets itself as a totally serious action thriller. It's directed by Mel Gibson, stars Marky Mark, has a high-stakes witness, no one coming to save these characters, all the ingredients. But in reality, it's so campy and so bad that it's actually funny. I was genuinely laughing out loud in some scenes, and I think that's what saved it a little. And I say a little because nothing in this film really makes sense. Sometimes the plane is nearly crashing from the slightest turn, then all sorts of chaos happens on board and the plane is completely fine. One minute they need headgear because the noise is deafening, the next they're casually talking without anything because an entire movie of people yelling over static would obviously be unwatchable. This tiny plane also pulls off maneuvers that only that plane from the movie 2012 managed to achieve. There's actually one specific thing that it does that would put it along with some of the worst disaster movies possible. On top of that, this film opens with what everybody agrees is the most blatant use of AI-generated imagery. Then it follows with CGI, which seems out of a film from at least 15 years ago. So you can tell it's all downhill from there. Next up is another action movie which gave everybody the completely wrong viewing experience, and that is Love Hurts, starring Ke Huy Quan. Now, after Ke Huy Quan's Oscar for Everything Everywhere All at Once, we were all expecting to see him in higher level projects. Instead, we got Love Hurts and The Electric State, which I've read is also bad, though I haven't watched it. The problem with Love Hurts is that although it is a very intense action film, it's very boring, and but also kind of confusing at points. It follows a seemingly ordinary real estate agent who is secretly a former hitman dragged back into that world. To be fair, a lot of the action sequences are very creative and fun. Ke Huy Quan has an extensive background in martial arts and fight choreography, working even for Marvel films, and here there's a great use of basically any object the protagonist can get his hands on. The big problem with this film is that the premise is very flimsy. We're supposed to believe that these characters are related or they are lovers, but there is zero chemistry. Others fall in love, but in such an unlikely way that it seems like something that a teenager would write in a fan fiction. The dialogues are very cringy, the whole setup just feels sloppy. Even the production design doesn't work. I guess the fact that he's a real estate agent allows for fights in completely uninhabited houses, but nothing feels like a real office, a real home, a real bar, a real bus stop, and all the moments in which the characters aren't actively fighting are incredibly boring, even in some of the most high-stakes moments. The characters keep on insisting on how dangerous this situation is, yet we never have a feeling of threat. We're meant to be intrigued by this femme fatale, yet there's nothing interesting about her. We're supposed to believe that there are years and decades of lore behind these characters, but we're just not interested in it. Now, not to draw absurd comparisons, but in my best films of the year video, I spoke about how before one battle after another, there are decades of lore and information which are only given to us in snippets, yet it still makes us curious and makes us feel what's at stake. Instead, Love Hurts makes none of it matter. Another film with unrealistic settings, flat characters, zero chemistry is Brick. And yes, I was tricked by TikTok into watching this film, which in hindsight has never proven effective. I don't think I've ever found a good film through TikTok. The film starts in an apartment where a couple suddenly can't leave because an impenetrable fortress-like material appears around their building. Now that premise is quite interesting. If you manage to make a good use of an enclosed space and you have good character chemistry, you can make a good paranoia-fueled story. But that kind of story relies on excellent acting, relies on believable character chemistry, and a realistic use of the environment. Think Cube, 10 Cloverfield Lane, Lock, Panic Room, and it works even better when whatever's happening outside is mysterious and confusing, like Incoherence. None of that works in Brick. First and foremost, the protagonist couple doesn't have any chemistry, so you never believe that they are worried for the other person. And when they start breaking down walls and floors to reach the other apartments, we meet other characters who are just as unconvincing. On top of that, they continue finding tools like sledgehammers or those insanely long ladders that painters use to paint entire apartment buildings. They're basically tearing through floor after floor in a matter of hours, yet they're barely tired. And when the film finally reaches the point where it should reveal what's actually going on, it becomes an impossibly convoluted plan, which I won't spoil in case you watch it. But to simply put, I never worried about these characters, never cared for them, never had any empathy, never wondered how this could play out if it actually happened in our real world. And I know that I have no clue how I would react if that were to happen anytime now, but the way these actors behave is just absolutely unlikely, unrealistic. Honestly, at least a film like Inside, in which Willem Dafoe is a thief who ends up trapped in an apartment he was robbing, at least shows the overflowing toilet he's been using. At least that's real. Next up is The Ritual. Is it even a worst films of the year list without the obligatory bad exorcism movie? And this year it stars Al Pacino. There's not much to say about the plot. A woman is possessed, a group of nuns and priests try to save her, everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong, usual exorcism movie. But now tell me why they decided to film this like The Office. I'm not joking. The camera keeps on zooming in on characters, it's constantly wobbly and shots are framed from behind random objects. I think they were going for an intimate, shaky cam, realistic effect, but 2 hours of it basically make it nauseating. And also, instead of having a documentary style, it unintentionally becomes hilarious because they will zoom into a random nun's face during the exorcism. And also I would love to see a layout of the rooms they're in, because half of the time the camera is supposedly hidden behind something, and then in the next shot there's clearly nothing to hide behind. Character-wise, Al Pacino is supposed to be the wise old priest, but he basically spends the whole film speaking in cryptic lines and withholding important information. For the nuns, I have never seen so many snatched iPhone faces, and Dan Stevens tries to hold together whatever he's doing his best. Actually, just a few days ago, I rewatched The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which absolutely terrified me as a kid and still holds up 20 years later. Mostly because it takes a more grounded approach and it has horror, but then also the courtroom proceedings. And I'm starting to come to the conclusion that good exorcism movies are very rare. If you really want to commit to the low budget, cheesy style of film, just go fully over the top and ridiculous, a la Pope's Exorcist. Next up is My Oxford Year, probably the only romantic film on today's list. I used to include a lot more of these films, or more, let's say, romantic comedies. I guess Brideheart could have qualified for this, but again, it was out of competition. If the characters in Brick and Love Hurts had zero chemistry, the love, the romance between this film's protagonists just doesn't exist. Although the lengths they go into the film should make you believe that they are madly in love. The plot follows an American woman studying abroad at Oxford, where she meets the perfect, intelligent, witty man. A series of ups and downs leads them to falling in love, and then the story continues further, but I won't spoil that part. At least even the trailer didn't spoil it. Now, everything I said earlier about Netflix films applies here. I'm talking bland cinematography, bland costumes, bland dialogue. The Friends are predictable lineup of comedic relief tropes. Everyone looks flawless, even in their worst moments. Also, there's a lot of confusion about the timeline. Sometimes things happen in a span of hours, and then months have passed, but yet nothing seems to have evolved in the story. We're just watching polished, empty shells of characters wearing cute sweaters. Honestly, the film feels like one of those over-the-top British-themed cafes you will find abroad. I love a good, unrealistic romantic film, but this film never had me giggling and kicking my feet or groaning because the guy said the "so bad it's good" line. I know this film isn't just a romantic film, it includes a lot more, and also I know it's aimed at a younger audience, and I'm not saying that every film needs to be a masterpiece. But if you're trying to make a story about love and also the sadder aspects of it, look at what movies like Past Lives, All of Us Strangers, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Brokeback Mountain managed to do with the destructive beauty of love and pain. That doesn't matter because this summer My Oxford Year ranked at #1 in Netflix's global top 10 movies list. But we're nearly at the top. At number 4, we have Hurry Up Tomorrow, a film you will see on many people's lists of worst films of 2025. The disaster of this film could have been predicted and avoided. The lead actor, singer The Weeknd, created and starred in the appalling series The Idol, which was so self-indulgent, mind-numbing and badly written that the last thing a person should have considered spending $15 million on would have been another mind-numbing, badly written, self-indulgent project starring The Weeknd. Yet here we are with a film again about a struggling artist, again badly executed. This film couldn't even secure distribution until Jenna Ortega and Barry Keoghan agreed to participate. It was also somewhat understood that this film was meant to accompany the new album The Weeknd was making. But at that point, why not make a good short film that you could release online for free on YouTube where fans could enjoy it and rewatch it? I don't know why they thought this would perform well in cinemas. Did they think this would have been a Taylor Swift level event? Anyway, in this film, The Weeknd plays a fictionalized version of himself, struggling with health issues that affect his live performances, along with behaviors that show he isn't emotionally stable. At one point, when Jenna Ortega's even more unstable character enters, I actually thought that the film was going somewhere for a moment. She did bring a little depth to the film, as she plays a very obsessive character, but that potential immediately collapses as then the film dives even further into this wannabe artsy music video aesthetic. But here we are on the podium. Last year's top 3 worst films were Uglies, Miller's Girl and Madam Web. At number 3 this year we have the live action remake of Snow White. A big premise here, I'm not a huge Disney person. I don't really care about this endless brigading, defending, accusing discussion about Disney films and the Disney remakes. I personally don't get why they keep on making these live action remakes when they clearly have the creative capabilities of making good animated films. I don't actively hate on them, and whether you like them or not, you have to admit that they are a good business model. What a lot of Disney adults fail to understand is how big the child and family audience is. These films sell very well, and for each child in the theatre there is nearly always a paying adult and all the merchandise that goes with it. These films sell extremely well. But all that being said, I didn't really follow up with all the discourse surrounding this film, which has been going on for years. Back from years ago when Rachel Ziegler basically seemed like she was nearly mocking the source material during promotional interviews. People were hating it even before it released. I decided to give it a go, but oh my god, is it bad. This film is made by one of the richest film companies in the world, if not probably the richest, yet the production quality looks like something out of a school play. The costumes look like theme park outfits. The sheer amount of CGI for literally everything was overwhelming and distracting. There was no sense of wonder or magic, two very important elements in Disney films. I guess Rachel Ziegler was good in her singing parts, but then as soon as you put her acting alongside Gal Gadot, it all started to crack, and I think we're all finally coming to terms with the fact that yes, Gal Gadot is hot, but she doesn't act well. When she used to act in the Fast and Furious films, it was kind of masked, but it just really stands out at this point. The CGI in Snow White was so overwhelming that it made me question whether it actually was really cost effective. One choice, for example, that they made was replacing the Seven Dwarfs with CGI characters, which really stands out, this uncanny valley. And it's very clear that half of the film was filmed with people on their own in front of green screens. A lot of what you see in the film just doesn't seem to match because of these super fake sets, this green screen. I can imagine Snow White basically pretended to talk to somebody for half of production. But moving up, we have Kinda Pregnant, a film in which Amy Schumer pretends to be pregnant, much to hilarity. This film really made me question who the target audience was, because it's literally just a woman pretending to be pregnant, a plan which backfires and lands her in increasingly ridiculous situations, all handled in a very childish way. At times it nearly seems like it's about to delve into something deeper, to touch on topics such as how being pregnant supposedly defines a proper woman, bring happiness, or makes life less lonely. But just like when it seems it's about to go somewhere meaningful, it just immediately reverts back to over-the-top slapstick with situations like her belly being stabbed, how funny, all with really poor jokes. I'm not saying a light-hearted comedy like this should dedicate half its runtime to analyse the mental struggles of pregnancy or motherhood, but it does make me think of far better films on similar topics like Juno, Plan B, Knocked Up, Tully. But at number one, the worst film of the year is actually one that will make you laugh, and that is War of the Worlds. Created by Universal, one of the biggest film studios, and streamed on Prime Video, owned by Amazon, Jeff Bezos, some of the richest people and companies in the world, yet it is worse than some of the lowest B-level, low-budget films I have ever seen. The movie presents the usual War of the Worlds premise of our planet being attacked by aliens, but this time it's all seen through the eyes of a cybersecurity expert, a super skilled Homeland Security agent. And when I say through his eyes, I mean literally, because a big part of this film is set inside his computer. We see his computer screen, or we see the protagonist looking at the screen. And almost everything that he does on that screen makes no sense. He hacks in the style of a 90s hacker movie, simultaneously stopping criminals while somehow checking inside a fridge. In 2 clicks, he basically has the whole world in his control, while having time to invade his kids' privacy by entering their messages. A lot of the time, it doesn't even make sense that we would see him through his screen, because he's on the webcam, but he's not talking to anybody. He's glued to the screen in this government building in which there seems to be nobody else, even during this high-stakes situation. He gets all his information in real time from YouTube and the news, which conveniently stay online while all the other communications fail. I could go on listing all the absurdities of how he tries to save the world and his family from the alien attack, all from his cubicle, with the help of a series of things tied to Amazon. I'm not joking. I would suggest watching the pitch meeting comedy skit about this film, as it's comedic gold and basically goes through every single thing that doesn't make sense about this film. That being said, compared to other films on today's list, I can actually see a group of friends picking this film for a fun movie night and watching it to have a laugh. And guess that's what matters in the end. See, I told you I'm not as evil as other years. And with that, we have reached the end of today's list. If you want to see me more positive, check out my video about the best films of 2025. And now I'd like to hear what film you hated the most this year, so make sure to leave a comment down below. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.